Let us now begin our class of the Surangama Sutra. The Surangama Sutra. Currently, we are studying the six roots. Previously, we've already covered how there are different objects to the six roots, or being perceived by the six roots. Also, we've covered the pure roots and the superficial roots or ordinary roots. If one were to obtain the well-penetrated roots, then all the roots can function in such a way that they can interchange with each other. The great compassionate Buddha also gave Ananda 6 examples, out of which 3 had not attained the arhathood and 3 did. For those who had not attained the arhathood, according to some commentaries, it is said that the Buddha gave those demonstrations and examples to console Ananda, because Ananda was quite upset and he felt that it was only the noble ones above the arhathood or attained the fruition of arhathood and beyond would be able to attain such kinds of realization, for people like himself would not be able to. For such reason, the Buddha then gave the example of both of the sentient beings that had already attained arhathood and the ones that had not. Ananda, since he had already attained the first fruition, the Shrodapana fruition, and he could be also considered as a noble one, because there are two possibilities. One, to count the ones that had already attained the first fruition as the noble ones, and the other one, the ones who had already attained arhathood as noble ones. So, to demonstrate in such a way, Ananda felt quite consoled and received certain kinds of confirmation from the Buddha, which demonstrates that if he were to try his best, he would also be able to have the opportunity to attain arhathood. Well, by now we can see that after attaining certain amount of merit or certain amount of fruition, not even the true noble fruition, one still would be able to perceive the object not by using their flash eye. Nowadays, we see that there are people with supernatural power or people with some kinds of powers that surpass that of the ordinary people. But however, those kinds of supernatural power would be different than the ones that we talk about, which is uncontaminated powers, uncontaminated penetrations. For the uncontaminated penetrations are usually obtained by people above the noble fruition. The ones with contaminated supernatural powers sometimes would be able to see others' bardo body, what the bardo body is doing, but they're not necessarily seeing it with their eye root, this flash eye. With our flash eye, we would not be able to see surpass a few mountains. But there are people who have those supernatural powers. They would be able to see not by relying on the flash eye route. Before studying the Surangama Sutra, some people may feel that, well, how could you see a bardo body? I remember the story of a person who had certain level of those kinds of supernatural power, and it was once that he got lost on the way because there was a heavy fog on the way, so he got lost. So many laughed at him, saying that this person could only see the ways to Bardo, but not see the road in the real world. But that could be true, because if one were to rely on the flesh eye, one would not be able to see certain things. But by relying on the special route or the pure route, one would be able to see, surpass that of the perceptible object of the flesh eye. There are people with certain developed levels of powers that can surpass of the ordinary people, or certain kinds of special inspirations than the others. But we cannot completely deny that kind of existence by saying that, oh, this person probably just making it up, this person's lying about it. I think it really depends, because if a person were to lie about it, then after a little while, if you were to ask that person the same question, the person may not provide you the same answer because he or she may forgot about it. But there are people who indeed do have those special powers too. After studying Surangama Sutra, you should know that by relying on the 6 roots, one should be able to surpass that of the ordinary roots. This is quite meaningful. At least we should know that we should not fathom of the other's perception by our perceptions. Now let's continue with the teachings today. The Buddha said to Ananda over here, "Then Ananda, after all your organs are completely freed, you will glow with an inner light. All the ephemeral, defiling objects and the material world will thereupon change their appearances like ice, which is melted by hot liquid. In response to your mind, they will transform and become knowledge and awareness, which is unsurpassed enlightenment." The Buddha over here tells Ananda that, well, now all of your roots, your 6 roots, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, are completely freed from the 6 objects. Once they're completely freed from the 6 objects, then you will glow with an inner light. The luminous essence can radiate out. At that moment, then all the ephemeral, defiling objects and material world will thereupon change their appearance. The superficial roots or the ordinary roots are the kinds of roots that belongs to the sentient world, the animate world. And then the inanimate world, all the mountains, rivers, and ground, and so on, all of the ephemeral appearances, the changes associated to them, the birth and death, the production and cessations, would then melt into wisdom, just like how a little piece of ice will melt immediately after being poured by hot liquid. Just like that, within one moment, one thought, in a very quick period of time, such kinds of ephemeral objects and the material world will then transform and become knowledge and awareness. The Surangama Sutra didn't specifically teach in such a way, but according to the Vajrayana teaching, it says that by relying on the instruction of the lineage teacher, at the time of recognizing the nature of your mind, the 6 roots will be freed. At the time of being freed, the inner light will shine forth, and then all the external phenomena, all of the animate and inanimate world, all of those coarse appearances will melt into the non-dual wisdom, just like how ice will be melted by hot water. Because our luminosity is just like water, and then the coldness that is associated to ice is is our ignorance. With the heated wisdom that is like the fire, which can melt the ice back into the wisdom that we inherently have. Because the nature of water had never changed. It is only because of external conditions and in the process, then they would transform into ice. That is how the great realized ones at the time of attaining realization, all of the coarse, the external phenomena would naturally then melt into wisdom. That is the meaning of this particular teaching over here. And then the Buddha told Ananda, it is like an ordinary person who has confined the seeing to his eyes. If you suddenly have him close his eyes, he will see darkness before him. The 6 organs and his head and feet will be enveloped in total darkness. If the person traces the shape of external things with his hands, then even though he cannot see, he will recognize someone's head and feet if he feels them. This knowledge and awareness are the same way. The Buddha here gives an example that says an ordinary person usually confines the seeing to the eyes. For such a reason, if all of a sudden this person were to close the eyes, then this person would only be able to see darkness and then not be able to perceive the hands or the feet and the heads. Those would also be dark, and those also would not be perceived by the eyes.
这个比喻呢，就是一个人的角度来就是讲的。这个比喻就是
This particular example, according to Master Jiao Guang and other commentaries, states that this example uses the human body. This particular example takes a person's body as an example, as an demonstration. But according to some great masters, they had demonstrated in the commentary saying that there are the 2 people in this particular example. What it means is that if a worldly person were to confine all the seeing to his eyes at the time of closing the eyes, then there are no other things other than darkness. At the same time, if another person were to stand in front of this person, then you would not still be able to see this person's hands, feet, and body. This is the example given by Master Jiao Guan and other masters. The particular explanation is a bit different, and in the Tibetan translation, it is translated the same way as the 2 people. And then to continue this example, it says that if this person traces the shape of external thing with his hands, then even though he cannot see, he will recognize someone's head and feet if he feels them, let it be himself, his own hands and feet, or the other person that's standing in front of him, the heads and feet and hands. One would still be able to understand that those are the feet and hands through his tactile sensations. Even with the eyes closed, if you were to touch the person that's right in front of you, just as when we played games as children, we would then, with our eyes closed, touch the other person's feet and hands. You would still be able to differentiate what those body parts are. Though with your eyes closed, your hands would work to fill the function of the root of the eye. The hands initially has the sensation of tactile, have touching, and people initially should be able to see through their eyes to make a differentiation of the different parts. But now we're using hands, the tactile sensations, to make differentiations of the different body parts. If we were to use the first explanation that there's only one person, at the time this person's eyes are closed, and then this person would lean over to touch his own feet and hands and so on, this person would still be able to know that all my feet are here, my head is up here. So one still would be able to have that kind of recognition even with the tactile sensation from the body, which works as the seeing function to the eyes. That is because under certain causes and conditions, our other roots can replace the function of other roots. A different root can replace the function of other roots under certain conditions. It is not to say that it is never possible. Usually, we do differentiate the forms by our eyes, but under special conditions, with the eyes closed, you can still differentiate things with your hands. So that's one of the examples. And then the next part is a little bit difficult to understand. The Buddha continued to say that if light is the condition requisite for seeing, then darkness brings the absence of seeing. But to perceive without light means that no dark manifestation can obscure that seeing. The very basic condition to perceive, to see, is to have light. Without light, we will not be able to see anything. With the lights off, you will not be able to see anything in the evening. So this brightness is really essential. Let it be the condition associated. So for the conditions that needs to be met for seeing, we definitely need light. And without light, it is darkness. It is then without seeing, because darkness and light are the objects to eyes. If it is light, then that could be conditions of seeing. If it is dark, then it becomes conditions of not seeing. The next two sentences says, but to perceive without light means that no dark manifestation can obscure that seeing. Usually, you need brightness, external brightness, so that you can see. But for the enlightened ones, the ones that have already attained a noble fruition, or someone that has already attained those special powers, then even without those external light, one would still be able to see, even if there is a lack of light. Because under the conditions of without external light, there is the inner light that radiates out. So that kind of inner light that radiates out could refer to the miraculous power of eyes, or the clairvoyance, or those kinds of superpowers. With those kinds of miraculous penetrations, these type of people do not need the support of the external light. In the lots of commentaries, the not bright is quoted in such a way that demonstrates that it seems to be without light. But there is the light that radiates from inside, with the inner light that radiates out, which could illuminate the seeing still. As long as such a person were to have this inner light, then no dark manifestation can obscure seeing. Usually for an ordinary person, we need flashlight, for example, at the time when we walk on the road in the night. But if I were to be enlightened or have some kinds of realization, higher realization, that I do not need to rely on the external light, then I can go wherever I wish, even in the darkness. that is not of a problem at all. So all of those external darkness would not become obscuration to us as long as we can attain such kinds of realization. I believe lots of the teachings within Surangama Sutra can truly inspire your inner insights and inspire your realization. Someone attained realization, for example, at the time of studying this particular verse, saying to perceive without light means that no dark manifestation can obscure the seeing. According to the autobiography of the great masters, it says that there was a person whose name is Tan Yao.
然后贪药是那个光耀的药，就是贪药啊。他是什么样呢？就是他就是母亲怀孕小的时候，母亲怀孕的时候呢，就梦到了好像
At the time when he was impregnated by his mother dreamt of him merging into her embrace. And then a monk in the dream said that it is in an auspicious day that the light of the Buddha had already bestowed over here. And then all kinds of auspicious signs showed up in this household. This particular child at the age of 7 were able to attain lots of knowledge without deliberately engaging in studies. So he was extremely smart. At the age of 9, he started studying Surangama Sutra. And when he read these particular 2 verses, but to perceive without light means that no dark manifestation can obscure seeing, he attained realization. And then after that, he had no obscuration to any knowledge, to literature, to any kinds of knowledge. We can see through history a great numbers of great masters of the past and the true practitioners can attain realization through studying and chanting the Surangama Sutra or practice upon it. There are lots of practitioners attained realization through the blessings of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas at the time of studying the Surangama Sutra. And also, maybe it is very much connected to your causes and conditions. I noticed that lately many people had great faith in the studies and the practice of Surangama Sutra. The Chinese language, the Chinese translation of this sutra is a bit difficult to understand, and sometimes at the time of reading them, I do feel that they're difficult. At the same time, the words and the sentences are indeed really beautiful. If you can continuously to engage in the study and practice of this sutra, you will definitely be able to receive the great blessings of this sutra, and we will be able to develop a great faith to this sutra as well. So we should constantly prostrate to this sutra, make offering, and chant and practice this sutra as much as possible. In such a way, we should be able to attain realization. Ever since such a long history, the great masters of the past had placed such great importance on this sutra. There must be some profound causes and conditions, and there must be some very profound sacred teachings that's concealed within. So at the time that we, the later generations, can encounter this supreme dharma, means that we can also understand some of the teachings from the Surangama Sutra, and we have also this auspicious connections to this sutra. To truly understand the Surangama Sutra will definitely need lots of effort. It takes me a long time for me to understand it as well, and I cannot say that I truly and fully understand it. Also, I try to rely on the Tibetan language translation so that I can explain the teaching to you. But this particular translation is still a little bit different than the other ones. It is because at the time of making this translation, the translation style was different than during the time of Songsang Khenpo and Tomi Samphota. At the time of the older translations, when the great translators such as Vairocana and Yeshidata and so on, all of those translators would translate in such a way that it would be easy to understand, and they follow certain regulations and formats. Though there are certain levels of beautifying the language, the translation followed by the rules that's made by the great kings such as Chuseong Ditsen and Songtsam Gampo, the translations are much easier to understand. For that reason, the Tibetan Tripitaka, if you were to read it, it would be very clear to understand it. But the Surangama Sutra was translated under the guidance of Master Zhangjia, and at that time the translation was rather quite a bit different. And on top of that, the Surangama Sutra, since the Chinese language is very difficult to understand, it's more ancient, also it's more beautified in terms of language. So it seems that the Chinese language is even more difficult to understand than the Tibetan translation. But there are a few places it took me quite a long time to try to gain certain understanding. Even the Tibetan translation is a bit difficult to understand as well. For that, we can imagine how difficult it is for you to understand the Chinese translation. Anyhow, I am sure if we were to study the Surangama Sutra, we will be able to gain understanding of it. Now, let's look at the next verse. It says that once the organs and objects are eradicated, how can the enlightened brightness not become perfect and wonderful? So it says that with the special realization, at the time all the roots can be used interchangeably. At the time when the roots are fully penetrated without any obscuration, our eyes would be able to see even if it is being obscured by darkness or being obscured by mountains. The same applies to the other roots. The great noble ones that do not have do not get blocked by those obscurations shows that once the organs and objects are eradicated, then how can the enlightened brightness not become perfect and wonderful? And why couldn't the perfect nature of Buddha nature, the perfect natural wisdom, to be perfectly manifested? Why wouldn't that be? Just like when we talked about the Mahakashyapa, whom already put extinction to the dualistic thoughts and grasping mind, had then already attained the perfect knowing. That is, of course, for the realized ones, that is perfectly reasonable. But since we have not attained realization, it is difficult for us to understand, and it still feels contradicting to us. But that's just because we have not attained realization. So far, the Buddha gave a very long teaching to Ananda, and then Ananda will ask a very long question. We should be rejoicing ourselves because now we have also entered into this Dharma assembly of Surangama and listened to the conversation between Ananda and the Buddha. Ananda at that time said to the Buddha, "World honored one, as the Buddha has said, the resolve for enlightenment on the causal ground, which seeks the eternal, must be in mutual accord with the ground of fruition." So the Buddha had already said that the aspiration at the causal stage has to be in accord with the fruition ground or ground of fruition. It has to be mutual with that. If you want your mind to be constant and without movement, and be steadfast. So over here, Ananda is asking that the six roots is a part of extinction. It's without any true existence. So how at the time of ground of fruition, while it is constant, and then the characteristics associated to the causal ground is still subject to production and cessation, then how could these two be immutual or correlate to each other? How could the constant characteristic associated to the fruition ground be mutual with something that has production and cessation? World honored one, the ground of fruition is Bodhi, Nirvana, true suchness, the Buddha nature, the Amala consciousness, the empty treasury of the thus come one, the great perfect mirror wisdom. But although it is called by these 7 names, it is pure and perfect. Its substance is durable like royal Vajra, everlasting and indestructible. There are 7 names associated to Bodhi, to the ground of fruition. This is from the different aspects to describe it. For example, from the aspect of realization. And when we talk about nirvana, it is from the eradicating of all the obscurations. And then suchness is without change, changelessness. The Buddha nature is something that is already inherent within all sentient beings, that is not changing and without any destruction from that particular level. The Amala consciousness is the untinted consciousness, undefiled consciousness. This is Sanskrit. Some would consider this as the 9th consciousness. Some says it's the 8th. In whichever way, it shows that at the time when it is impure, it is Alaya. At the time it's pure, it is the Amala consciousness, that is the pure natural wisdom. All sentient beings has already been endowed with the merits of Buddha nature, and such kinds of Buddha nature, since it is empty, it has the qualities of seeing, of making observation of all phenomena, which is the great mirror wisdom. And there are different levels of such kinds of merits to describe of the Buddhas. So over here it then states the 7 types of different names to describe the different aspects of the perfect and the pure merits of Buddha nature that could purify all obstacles and perfect all the merits. Also, that does not have any change, that is without production, without cessation, that is solid, and that is the substance is durable like a royal Vajra and everlasting and indestructible. So Ananda says that since you've already stated that there are 7 different names associated to the fruition, that is the Bodhi, that is that is undestructible like the Vajra king, then from the Buddha nature's great unconditional Dharma's perspective speaking, Ananda continued to ask questions, saying that if the seeing and hearing are apart from light and darkness, movement and stillness and penetration and obstruction, and are ultimately devoid of substance, they are then like thoughts apart from sense objects. They do not exist at all. Over here, Ananda asked a question saying that, well, all of the smelling, tasting, and those kinds of objects, if those are parted, for example, the object of seeing essence is light and dark, and the object to hearing is movement and stillness, and to smell it is penetration and obstruction. If none of those were to exist, then all of the roots and the root consciousness would not exist either. Just like our mind, for example, if there is no object to it, if there is no object that is the Dharma, then there would be an extinguish of consciousness. Then he is asking that at the time there is no object, there is no six roots. Under this condition, Ananda continued to ask, how can what is ultimately destroyed be a cause by which one cultivates in the hope of obtaining the fruition of the thus come one's sevenfold permanent abode? This is such a great question. Ananda saying that, well, since you said the causes and the fruition stage should be mutual with each other, then when you look at that the causes which are already ultimately destroyed, how could this cause be in mutual or correlate with the fruition that is constantly abiding? Since the six roots at the time of parting from the objects, then there is no six roots. They're just like the child of a barren woman. If the cause is such ultimately destroyed, then it doesn't matter how much we would practice, we still cannot obtain the fruition that is indestructible. How could we attain such kinds of realization then? And then he continued to say that world-honored one, when it is parted from light and darkness, the seeing ultimately empty, just as when there is no sense object, the essence of thought is extinguished. In fact, not just the eye faculty, it applies to all the other roots as well. And then Ananda says that I go back and forth in circles, minutely searching, and basically there is no such thing as my mind or its objects, just what should be used to seek the unsurpassed enlightenment. Ananda says that I think over again and again, and I went back and forth in circles for many times after such profound thinking and contemplation by myself, after I minutely searching by myself. I wish to ask this question to you, that there is no such thing as my mind or its object. As long as there is not my mind, then there is no mental factors, 52 mental factors. There is no, if there is no mind and mental factors, there is no six consciousness or eight consciousness. In such a way, the root consciousness, the so-called self, mind, five aggregates, cannot be established. Under such minutely observing all of these and understanding that they cannot be established, and how can I seek for an unsurpassed enlightenment? Ananda says that I really couldn't think through. After thinking it over again and again, I feel that Buddha, you're giving, your teaching has a big loophole in there, and I cannot understand it. So today I would like to risk my life and ask the question to you again, which reminded me that the other day a Khenpo started to complain about my faults. And I replied to him by saying that, why do you only pay attention to my faults? The Khenpo replied by saying that I've heard that others stated you like others to praise you, but I think it's quite good to reflect some of your faults to you as well. And then I said that, but I do not agree to the faults that you pointed out, though that I do have faults, but if you were to blame everything to be my faults, I do not agree. And then we started to debate over those. And then I pointed out it was his prejudice. Anyhow, let's look at Ananda. So Ananda kept on thinking again and again, and then asked this question by saying that, well, this mind and object is not existent, then how could we seek for the unsurpassed enlightenment? And then he continues to say that the thus come one previously said it was a tranquil essence, perfect and eternal. His present contradiction defies belief and is a resort to idle theorizing. How can the thus come one's words be true and actual? Ananda said that, well, the Buddha, you've already stated that the 6 roots, they are perfect, they are the essence, they are the perfectly abiding, but you're talking about now that even the root of the I is not existent, it is empty. Same applies to the root that is the nose and all of the others. In such a way, your speech has become idle. You're simply making contradictory to each other. Whatever you said previously being constant, now you're saying that they are not, they cannot be established. Then you're simply speaking this frivolous language. How are you still renowned as being the one that talks the true words and actual words and words that's diamond-like? This time Ananda is quite bold addressing the Buddha. And then he's afraid that the Buddha would get upset. He said that I only hope the Buddha will let fall his great compassion and will instruct us who do not understand and who are holding on tightly. He says that a great compassionate Buddha, please resolve my confusion. Please instruct us so that we can understand and no longer be tightened by our confusions and doubts. Over here, Ananda simply points out that he felt that the Buddha's speech is contradicting to each other. It is because he kept on asking the Buddha the questions, then the Buddha gave him the teachings which then formed the Surangama Sutra. The Buddha did not appear to be upset at all. The Buddha told Ananda, you study and learn much, but you have not yet extinguished outflows. In your mind, you know only the causes of being upside down, but when the true inversion manifests, you really cannot recognize it yet. Since Ananda has not accomplished the full extinguish of all, he has not attained the fruition of arhathood. Usually when we talk about the 5 sages of the heretics, they have attained the 5 penetrations, but not the 6th penetration. The 6th penetration would be attained at the level of arhathood. So here the Buddha simply pointed out that you have not extinguished outflows. And for such a reason, in your mind, you know only the causes of being upside down. There's already this kind of erroneous causes, the false causes, as you've already stated before. You think you already know the causes of false. But when such kinds of upside down false causes appear in front of you, still don't know. Just as sometimes when people would complain that this is not reasonable, that is not reasonable, but they do not see the unreasonable things that they do or they think of. They cannot discover that. The Buddha then over here says that lest your sincerity and faith remain insufficient. The Buddha said that I know that you have sincerity and faith. I will try to make use of an ordinary happening to dispel your doubts. However, if I were to directly address your question, you probably will still have doubts and confusion. You probably would still not be able to believe it, because in the mind stream of Ananda, there are still the habitual tendency of solid grasping from the Hinayana from the Hinayana habitual tendencies that's left over. So the Buddha said that if I were to directly address your question on such a profound and subtle true nature of the Buddha nature, you probably would not be able to understand. For such reason, in order to dispel your obstacles, though that I know that you have this, it is because I know that you have this sincerity, but if I were to speak to you directly, you would not be able to believe it. For that reason, I will change to a different method to give you an answer. And this particular answer would be more acceptable to you. It's more comfortable for you to receive. So the Buddha did not directly give him the answer. In Vajrayana, sometimes I think that we also receive similar instructions. For example, at the time of receiving the empowerment of the four nintics, we would receive various kinds of objects in front of the six roots, some pleasant, some unpleasant, some beautiful, some not. So at those times, some of the very sharp faculty, the ones that would be able to attain realization, but for the ones with dull faculty would not be able to do so. And at the time when Buddha gives the direct instruction to Ananda, he uses this worldly way to give him the instruction. Now it should be easy to understand. In the Vajrayana teachings, in fact, the instructions are very similar. For example, at the times of giving Mahayana teachings, the guru would sometimes use a bell or use a drum or blow the conch. There are all kinds of sounds that the guru would utilize to point out the nature of your mind, or sometimes would ask you to look at the space. And in the Sutrayana teaching, the Buddha also over here used the sound to lead Ananda to recognize the nature of his six roots. For example, if the Buddha instructed Ananda to listen, then he is simply instructing him to listen to the nature of listening. And then at the time of understanding the nature of listening, your roots you can attain the penetration of all the roots. You would be able to see the nature of sounds. The later part of the explanation of the listening and the sounds are rather separated in terms of the explanation. But all the hearings are from the different perspectives, sometimes from hearing, sometimes from the object, sometimes it is from the subject's point of view. There are lots of profundity in those teachings. For people who do not study it, people would feel that, oh, what's that teaching? The Buddha asked Rahura to ring the bell, and then Ananda would listen, and then the Buddha would ask, have you heard it? Heard it? Have you heard it yet? Have you heard it? And would keep on asking those. The non-Buddhists who are not understanding, who do not understand this part, they would feel that, well, why is the omniscient Buddha making such kind of conversation with the most prolific Ananda? Well, in fact, we should be able to understand there are lots of profundity in those questions and answers. The Buddha over here says that the thus come one instructed Rahula to strike the bell once, and then he asked Ananda, did you hear that? Ananda and the member of great assembly all said, we heard it. The strike to the bell, what's the pronunciation in Chinese? There are two disciples stated a little bit different pronunciation, and Kempo is simply verifying what's the proper pronunciation of the term.
尖锥吧，你看，啊，寺院里面说尖脆是吧？寺院里，那如果宿楼的话，你们寺院是特殊寺院。我觉得尖锥，啊，然后后面是锥还是脆呢？尖脆是吧？ 啊？我是一直念剑椎，锤也可以说。不是12里面这么说的，这个每个暗句、每个那个诵戒的时候都会说。藏地叫甘之，啊？你们寺院是怎么说的？你们是这个剑锤是吧？那剑坠以前说剑坠的，敲剑坠，那也行，这个也行，那个也行，不对吧？啊，是不是2个字，一个字，就是金字旁，木字旁一个，对，好嘛，那咱啊。哇，我们有时候是，汉文有时候复杂，尖锤、尖锥，那确定了没有？现在，我知道是2个字，但是读音的话呢，应该是基本上准确是一个吧，就是尖锥，尖锥就是这么长的一个，它在戒律里面已经讲它的大小长短。讲戒的时候怎么讲啊？一切有部戒律里面一直讲它的很多的。以前我刚开始的时候都是也什么怎么弄的？确定了没有？没有，反正藏文这个都不要紧。藏文当中真理说的是，这个敲。
Anyhow, this is not that important. Over here it says that it is to strike the bell.
不知道梵文当中是钟还是应该是钟吧。
Not so sure if it's the bell, also the bell in the Sanskrit as well. Anyhow, it says that
听到不？听得到不？
is to strike the bell once and then asked Ananda, did you hear that?
听得到不？然后问阿难就是听得到不？然后阿难就是这个和还有大众呢，就是说听到了，就是我问。
Ananda and the member of Great Assembly all said we heard it. This is the first question and answer. The second one is that the bell ceased to sound. And then the Buddha again asked, do you hear it now? Ananda and the members of the Great Assembly all said, we do not hear it. This is the first strike of the bell. The second strike, then Rahula struck the bell once again. The Buddha again asked, do you hear it now? Ananda and the Great Assembly again said, we hear it. The Buddha asked Ananda, what do you hear and what do you not hear? The Buddha said, well, what is that the sound that you hear and what do you not hear? So what is here and what is not here? Those are the questions related to hearing, the 4 questions. Ananda and the member of Great Assembly all said to the Buddha, when the bell is rung, we hear it. Once the sound of the bell ceases, so that even its echo fades away, we do not hear it. Once the sound of the bell ceases, a while after the bell is struck, its sound disappears, so that even its echo fades away. At that time, slowly and slowly, there is no sound to hear. That is not here.
问上面的话呢，就是反复问了2次。
Those are the
听到没有？听到没有？就是听到是
two times of questioning of what is here and what is not here. Those are from the aspects of the roots, whether you can hear through the roots or not. And then later there are questions on what's the nature of hearing and what's the nature of sound. The Buddha then asked Rahula to strike the bell for the third time. The Daskam again instructed Rahula to strike the bell, and he asked Ananda, saying that, is there sound now? Ananda and the members of Great Assembly all said that there is a sound, because there is the bell that just struck. For us, since we are not striking the bell, but we have the sound of the conch being blown, at the time of hearing the sound of the conch, you can also make the observation of the conch sound. Did you blow the conch before my class? How in advance of the class? I don't think I've ever heard the blown of the conch. In the past, I used to blow the conch myself before my classes to the others, and every time we would contemplate in such a way that it's wonderful that I still have this opportunity to blow conch and to give Dharma teachings in this lifetime. There were people who offered to blow the conch for me, and I said that it's okay. I think I can do that myself, because every time when I blow the conch, I would contemplate in such a way that may I have the opportunities to blow conch for lifetimes. Of course, back then we didn't really have that many people. I only had maybe a dozen or maybe a dozen or so people. Usually at that time, if there's more than a dozen people or maybe about 20 people in that class, people would say that there are too many people in that class. Anyhow, I used to blow the conch by myself. And at that time, Phuntsal Rinpoche would walk to the Gandhara shrine hall, and he would ask the people that blow the conch at the time, or before that, there is a very long mantra to be chanted at the time of blowing the conch. So one should be chanting the mantra at the time of someone else is blowing the conch. I think whenever we have time over here, since we all attend Dharma classes, we should blow the conch. And recently I've heard it very often in the morning, and I hear it most in the morning. I think this is quite skillful. It's a skillful means to blow the conch to benefit sentient beings, also to benefit ourselves as well. Anyhow, for the third time that Rahula struck the bell, the Buddha asked, do you hear it? And then the Great Assembly and Ananda said, yes, we did. And then the Buddha asked again, after a while, after the sound ceases, the Buddha said that, do you hear it again? Do you hear it now? The Great Assembly and Ananda said that no, there is no sound anymore. For the fourth time that Rahula was instructed to strike the bell, the Buddha said that, is there sound now? Ananda and the Great Assembly said that, yes, there is a sound. And then the Buddha asked, what is sound? What is meant by sound and what is meant by no sound? Ananda and the Great Assembly told the Buddha, when the bell is struck, there is sound. Once the sound ceases and even the echo fades away, there is said to be no sound. At the time when the bell is struck and then there is the sound coming out of it, that is a sound. And when the sound slowly fades away, even the echoes fades away, that is called no sound.
然后看起来的是好像如来和那个
It seems to be
这个阿难的话呢，就是一直在这样玩，就是就
a
这个
game
是
that
只有
the
一句话
thus
就
come
去解决
one
了，
is
但是这
playing
个
with
呢
Ananda,
就
and
是
it
有点
seems to be
像像理
quite easy to
在一起
resolve
往上
the
想一想，
questions
看看
asked
这个
by the
到底
Buddha.
是它表示
But
什么
there
意
is
思
such
就让明天
profundity
具体的
within
这
those
个意
questions
思呢
and
下一节
answers.
课
I
当中会
wish
讲
that you
到。
could contemplate upon it, and we will further explain the meanings tomorrow.
Tribun tsune ruwa